and his nose started bleeding from the shock. Another officer, with blood pouring down his face, ordered him to cannon number 7. Einar had originally been assigned to number 10, but that one had taken a direct hit and now stood lopsided by the cannon port. Around it lay a royal of motionless bodies in a slowly spreading pool of blood. Small streams of urine formed deltas between their legs. He could not see if Christen or little Clausen was among them. A severed foot lay a short distance away. Like the dead men, Einar had wet himself. The roar of cannons had caused an earthquake in his intestines, and it filled his trousers too. He knew that people emptied their bowels at the moment of death, but he hadn't imagined that it could happen to the living as well. The notion that war made a man of you vanished as he felt the stickiness slide down his thighs. He felt half corpse, half baby, but soon discovered that he was not the only one. The stench of upturned private buckets wafted across the deck. It wasn't just coming from the slaughtered. Most of those still fighting had soiled pants. The gun captain at cannon number 7 was still alive, bleeding from a cut above his eyebrow, where he'd been hit by a flying splinter. He screamed at Einar, who could hear nothing, but when he pointed at the cannon, Einar understood that he wanted him to load it. His arms were too short to reach, so he had to climb halfway out of the cannon port in order to stuff the cannonball into the muzzle, exposing himself to the enemy battery. As he worked, only one thought occupied him. When was the next round of snaps? And I think I'll leave it there with the atrocities of war. And then I'll go to a very different scene, which is halfway through the book. And this is actually when another war takes place, but in this part I've chosen to read for you. We don't hear about it. This is an elderly man. He could be a grandfather, except that he never had children. And he then is introduced to a boy who has just lost his father at sea in the war. And this boy has a pregnant mother who has more or less suffered a nervous breakdown by the news of the loss of her husband. And the little boy is in need of some kind of masculine presence. And so they are introduced to each other. And the first time they meet each other, they go for a walk along the port. And the old man feels very awkward with the boy because he's not used to boys. And it's not quite that he has volunteered for this job. So here is their first meeting. The boy walked silently beside him down to the harbour. It was a clear, sunny day. The boy had no mittens on, and his hands were red with cold. "What happened to your mittens?" "I lost them." They walked along Havnegade to Damskibsbroen and looked at the water. A thin layer of ice had formed during the night, and the sun sparkled in the white frost around it. Albert felt he could speak, but didn't know what to say. No, Albert felt he should speak, but didn't know what to say. What did you talk to children about? His irritation with the widow increased. "Come," he said to the boy, who looked lost in thought at the sight of the frozen water. They walked on along the wharf, past the coal depot, and down towards Prinsenbroen. "What is it like to drown?" the boy asked. "Your mouth fills up with water, and then you can't breathe anymore." "Have you tried drowning?" "No," Albert said. "If you drown, you die, and I'm here." "Does everyone drown at the end?" "Most people don't drown." "My dad drowned," the boy said in a tone that implied that this kind of death gave him a sense of pride and elevated the father. Then his voice grew more hesitant. "If we drown, do we ever come back?" "No, we never come back. My mama says my dad's an angel now." "You must listen to what your mother says." Albert was feeling more and more uncomfortable. He dreaded that the boy might certainly burst into tears. What would he do then? Take him back home? He couldn't return with a sobbing child. That would be like losing your cargo and letting the sea take your ship. He tried to distract the boy. The harbour was full of moored vessels, some kept back by their owners because of the war, and others simply home for the winter. There was nothing to indicate that Marcel's day as a seafaring town were coming to an end. Albert pointed to the ships. "Are you going to sea when you're grown up?" he asked, and instantly regretted it. "Will I drown then, like my dad?" "Most sailors come home again. Then they grow old like me and die in their bed one day." "I want to be a sailor like my dad," the boy said, "but I don't want to drown and get eaten by a fish. And I don't want to die in my bed either, because my bed is for sleeping in." "Is there any way not to die?" "No," Albert said, "there isn't." "But you're very young. You have plenty of years left to live. That's almost the same as not dying." "Would you like to die?" "I wouldn't mind now. I'm very old, so it doesn't matter if I do." "So you're not sad?" "No, I'm not sad. My mama's sad. She's always crying. Then I comfort her." "You're a good boy," Albert said. He pointed across the water. "Look, there's a steamer. When you go to sea, it'll probably be on a steamer." "Can steamers sink?" the boy asked. Albert looked at the black painted steel hull. The memory was written on the bow in white lettering. "Yes," he said. "Yes, they can."
How much research did you do for this book?
I did a lot of research because I realized that I knew nothing about sailors' lives, especially not back in bygone centuries. So what I did was not only, I went, there is in Master a local, very eccentric, homemade sailors museum.
Oh, wow.
And I went there and said, "This is my plan, I want to write a book about your town and its story, history," and they handed me the key to the archives. And that was just the most amazing things, because they knew that they had an amazing story, which they had in a Danish context, because they became a kind of almost, in a country that in these years, because of lost wars, became very introvert. They became extrovert, discovered there was a world market, started sailing all over the world. And when the era of the sailing ships were over, so was the story of the town, the history of the town.
Right.
And so they went from house to house and asked all the old sailors, tell us your story before it's too late.
Wow.
With tape recorders or notebooks or whatever. And then when I stayed there, I also involved the inhabitants of that small town by giving a kind of, well, not lectures, but readings at the local library, where I read from the work in progress. And then invited people to come with their stories. So I was invited home, placed in the sofa, coffee and cookies were served, and then they would come with letters, grandfather's letters, or an uncle's little private memoirs, or whatever.
Wow.
So the book is, in a way, of course, it's my book, and it's the work of an individual writer, but if you ask the inhabitants of Master, they would claim it's their book and not mine.
Which seems kind of fitting in a way. That explains a bit. Did you go sailing at all? Because there's a lot of reviews have talked about how the particular, like, the jargon and the terms are all in here, and it's very well.
Yeah, but that is, a nerd's research, because actually sailing doesn't interest me. And I mean, it doesn't interest me to be on a ship.
Right.
So I didn't do that kind of research. And sometimes I had a lot of sailors reading it, and they'll come to me, and they think they'll meet a fellow kind of sailor, somebody with the same passion as they have, and they go away so disappointed. And I think I'm the living embodiment of the general rule: never meet the writer. You will be disappointed.
That's fantastic. That's really fantastic. One of the books that you didn't read the very beginning, but the very first line is, many years ago there lived a man named Lawrence Madsen, who went up to heaven and then came down again thanks to his boots, which calls to mind, I think, for a lot of people, the first line of 100 Years of Solitude, which seems to be a sort of similar book in terms of its epicness and it's the generation upon generation sort of telling, and the entry of a particular place in the world. Was that at all an influence on you, or did you have any other?
No, it wasn't an influence.
Yes.
And I had read it 30 years ago, and forgotten all about it. But there was an academic reviewer who wrote an endless review proving that this was the Danish version of Marquez' fantastic novel. And she proved point for point how it was totally similar. And when it wasn't similar, she claimed it was because I was rebelling against Marquez. But no, he's a great writer, but I wasn't really influenced by it. And I mean, there's a lot of extraordinary things happening in the book, but actually, these were things I found in my research. So the more unlikely things are, the more you can show it really happened.
Right.
And vice versa.
Yeah.
The more kind of everyday like it is, the more you can be sure I invented it.
Yeah. Turns out it goes, isn't it? That's very interesting. It does seem to play, your description of it seemed to play with one of the questions I was going to ask you about, like your previous, this is your first novel.
No, it's my third novel.
Third novel. Okay, but you've done a lot of journalistic work and
a
writing.
lot of essays.
And essays.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask you how that transition happened, but it seems very obvious because it seems like that it played to your strengths, like all this information that was there, all these people.
Yes, but you see, the thing was that I realized during my research that I could only write it as a novel.
Okay.
If I wanted to unfold the story, really unfold it, and people it with real characters coming alive. But that scared me a little bit because I had somehow settled for the idea that I was not a novelist. So I had better stay away from it. And then I with great anxiety, I felt, oh God, you have to write a novel now.
Yeah.
So I embarked on it. But it was quite a process, a learning process for me.
I can imagine. How long did it take you to write this?
5 years.
Oh, that's not as long as I thought it was. I think you were going to say like 15.
No.
5 years is like, that's pretty good crap. Good job. The last thing I was going to ask you is ask everyone, is there anyone from, any authors from Denmark or that you've read elsewhere that you think we should be paying attention to? Because Danish literature, there's not a lot of it making its way into English, unfortunately.
Yes, there's a writer, a younger writer whom I admire a lot. His name is Jacob Ejersbo.
Who was there, right, at the Penrose Voices Festival?
No, he was not, because he's dead, unfortunately.
Never mind.
He died quite young. He died at the age of 39, but after having accomplished a big trilogy, because he spent part of his childhood in Africa, and this trilogy is about the clash between African culture and Western culture. And it's a very, for a Danish writer, very ambitious work, and it's amazing. And I know it's being translated into English, and a British publisher has bought it.
Oh, really?
So it might travel across the Atlantic, as I had the luck to do.
I know, yeah. You had one of the best editors in the business with Dranko. Well, and when I talked to her assistant about your book a while ago, she said that when she was reading it before anything was out, it's like, this is just really so detailed about like the seafaring life. It makes me never want to ever have been a sailor or have anything to do with sailing at all. So it's so specific and graphic, and you can kind of hear that and hear all the details. But well, thank you very much. We'll talk about Kamchatka. Which involves risk. Does anyone know Kamchatka? I didn't know this until I started reading the beginning.
Is it Russia?
Yeah,
yes, it is.
Peninsula, and it involves risk in the book a lot. Anyways, this was originally published in 2003 and has been translated from the Spanish by Frank Quinn and is published by Grove and Black Cat. And this literally did come out on Tuesday too. So Marcelo was born in Buenos Aires in '62. Is a writer, filmmaker, and journalist. And as a journalist, I found this interesting. So a friend that I published at Del Carica works for Rolling Stone, and he interviewed a lot of the same people you've interviewed, but you've interviewed Madonna, Julia Roberts, Mick Jagger, Paul McCartney, Woody Allen, Arthur Miller, Martin Scorsese, among others. You've also penned 4 screenplays, including the film version of Kamchatka, which was Argentina's official submission for the 2002 Oscar in the foreign language film category. The novel, which I started reading last night, is a playful, engrossing book about a 10-year-old's experiences in 1976 after the Peron's government is overthrown and the Dirty War begins. The novel really begins with Harry being whisked away for a vacation at his parents' friend's house, and it's through his eyes that the readers get to decipher what's really going on. It's organized, interestingly, into 5 periods: biology, geography, language, astronomy, and